An important tool that you'll use in programming is the ability for your program to do things over and over again. That's called looping, and we're going to talk about it today in our next Programming Basics video. So looping is the ability of a program to do something over and over and over again, but in a controlled way. And so today we're going to be talking about how you introduce looping into your program. I like to equate looping to what you often see a dog do when it chases its tail, because it keeps going from the top to the down to the bottom and then back up to the top again, and around and around and around. I think there's something we can learn from that. First of all, if we do that too long, we're going to get dizzy. Well, for you and I to chase our tails is a little more difficult, right? But there are some things that we need to always look at with loops. The first is, what are we doing to start the loop? And then the second is, what are we doing to finish or to end the loop? Have you ever seen a dog that just chases its tail over and over and over again and it seems like it's never going to end? Well, dogs are a little bit different than a program. A program could literally do it forever, but a dog is going to either get hungry or be distracted by a bird or a cat or something and finish it off. Your program isn't going to have those distractions unless you put them in. So, just a few things to think about. Also, to make it even a little bit more complicated, there are loops that are where we test or check the end at the beginning of the loop, and there are loops that we check whether it's time to end at the end of the loop. These are called pre-test at the beginning and post-test, and the type of work that you're wanting the computer to do will determine which of these is the best to use. So we'll talk a little bit more of that as we go along. So I know the last time we, in our last video, we used the idea or the concept of a guessing game. And we put this guessing game together that allowed a user, where we picked a mystery number and we allowed a user to guess it. That was a fun little game, but it had a bit of a shortcoming. And that shortcoming was, we only went through it once. The poor guy had one chance to guess. And if he wasn't right, it was over. Well, it was over whether he was right or he wasn't right. So what we want to do today is to take the game that we built and to expand it and enhance it into something that's a little more sophisticated, a little more complex, but also way more usable. Okay? So some things that we'll have to think about is, what type of loop should we use? How do we get it started? And what are we going to use to end the loop at the end? So just like what we talked about in our last video on conditions or branching, a loop also uses a logical statement to decide when to end. And so that logical statement ultimately resolves to either a true or a false. The true or the false is, true, do I keep going? Or false, do I end? So let's look at how this plays out in a program. Here is the program that we put together in our looping and branching video. I hope this is familiar to you. If it doesn't look familiar, if you haven't had a chance to go through the branching video or conditions video, then take another look. But we're going to actually take some of this program and we're going to move it over to our new program that deals with looping. So I'm just copying it, coming over here to the new program I created for loops, and pasting it in. All right. Other than a few formatting problems, we have it here. So let's talk about, just start out here at the beginning, what we want to accomplish. I'd like to put that in a comment header up here. So we want to guess a number. We want, guess a number is that's kind of the name of this, right? We want to assign a mystery number, ask the user to guess it, and tell them if their guess was too high or correct. All right, that's what we were doing on our last program, but let's add on top of that, give them a chance to try it again until correct. Okay? All right, so how on earth do we do this? Sometimes this is where it can get a little tricky for newer programmers to know how to put this all together in one. Well, one thing we know for sure is we've got just about everything in this program already done. We just have to know where to start our loop and where to end our loop. and how to end our loop. All right. So let's think about where we want thinking about the dog going around in circles, right? You got the head of the dog and you got the tail of the dog. Where should the head of our loop be? Well, we want to make sure that we're asking them to guess again, right? So we know that it's got to be above this, but we don't want to be picking a new number every time, so we want it to be below this. So it sounds like we need it right in here. So I mentioned earlier that there are a couple of different types of loops, and I'm just going to write them out here. There's a for loop. This is for Java, but most languages have something similar. There's a while loop, and there's a do loop. Both a for loop and a while loop assess the test at the beginning of the loop. So they check at the beginning of the loop if you're matching, if you should continue to do the loop. So one thing that means is that in a pre-test loop, you may never actually go through the stuff that's inside the loop. Because if it's false to begin with, it will never do it. In a post-test loop, you will always go through once, because you go through and then you test to see if you're going to do it again. Okay. Well, for the case of this particular one, we're going to definitely go through the loop at least once, because we're going to ask them to guess inside the loop. So we're going to use a while loop. The difference between a while loop and a for loop is that a for loop has a predetermined number of times that it's going to loop through. So we know that we're going to go through it 10 times, for instance. Well, we don't know how many times it's going to take our user to guess the right answer, do we? So we're going to use a while loop. Okay. So a while loop is structured like this. So this is the top of our loop. Now let's figure out where the bottom of our loop is. Well, we know that we want to check to see if they got it right here, right? So let's put the end of our loop right down here. Now, if we slide all this stuff over, you can see how we've kind of got it organized. All right, so the next thing we need to think about is how we're going to end the loop. Well, I said that, like in a conditional statement, inside of these parentheses, we're going to have to put a logical expression. That expression will resolve to true or false. If it's true, we will keep going through the loop. If it's false, we will end the loop after we get to the bottom of it. Okay. So what I often like to do with a while loop is to use what's called a Boolean variable. I know Boolean is a big word, but it really has a very little task, and that is it has a value of either true or false. Okay. We declare this type of a variable in the same way we do any other variable. We're going to use the type Boolean or bool, and then bool, I guess that's in C. And then we give it a name. Let's say is let's call it continue. And it doesn't like continue. How about cont? And we're going to set it equal to true. Okay. So now let's go back to what I was doing before. Sorry about this. Is done. Oh, I keep second guessing myself. All right. So what we're going to say inside of this loop here is we're going to put cont in here. Because cont resolves to true or false, we can say while cont is true, that's basically what it means to just put it in there like that. If we wanted it to be false, we use this exclamation point. That means not. So that would be while not continue. So in this case, it reads while continue, then we go through it. Now, what is really, really super important for a loop is that it have a way to get out of it, right? Now we said that the way that you get out of it is by being correct. So what if we just simply came down here and in the middle of this if statement, this conditional statement, we know that by the time we get here and we print this print line, it's correct. Well, what if right after it, we just set continue equal to false? Right? So this way, it's going to come through. We're going to ask a question. We're going to tell them if it's too high or too low. Of course, these don't. If you do this, we want it to come back to the top again and ask them again, right? But if you get to the one where it's correct, then it's false, and we want it to finish here, and then we want it to drop out of the loop. Okay? So I hope all that makes sense to you. Okay, so here is our program. Let's give it a try. We're going to save it. We're going to run it. Sorry. All right. And off she runs. Okay. So down here in the console, we see it asking us, please make a guess. All right, so we're going to say 100. We know that that is too low. And it tells us it's too low. Perfect. It asks us to guess again. 150. We know that that one's too high. It tells us it's too high, and it asks us to guess again. And then the last time, if you remember, it was 123. We're going to make the correct guess. It tells us correct, and it drops out. So this is a simple loop that is using, of course, there's conditions within it. We're kind of building on what we're already learning with variables and conditions and sequences. And the simple loop gets us there. So again, a simple loop has to have a start. We have to decide where the right place for it to start is. It has to have an end. Here's our end for our simple loop. It's going to end at the end. We have to decide whether it's a pretest or a post-test. We used a pretest because it's checking it here at the top. And we have to have a way to get out of it. And we get out of it by using this Boolean variable called cont. Starts at true. So true, yeah, we're going to continue as true. But we have to have a way to end it. And we end it by coming down here and in this if statement, setting it to false. So if we guess it right, we're going to print out correct. We're going to set continue to false, meaning nope, don't continue anymore. And then we're able to finish up the loop. So I hope this has helped you to understand a simple loop.